everybody. Welcome to Narrative Live. It's a very special show tonight because we're going to talk about Trump Tower Moscow in a way you've not heard before. We have some big news to break tonight, and we're excited to bring it to you. Hey, Tracy McElroy in Baltimore, how are you?
I'm good, Zev. How are you?
I'm good. I'm trying to make this music go down because in my ears they sound pretty hot, pretty loud. So a big show today. I want to let people know what we're going to be talking about.
Sure. Tonight, what we're going to take a look at is this. Was Trump's effort to build a Moscow tower tied to his election campaign and his eventual victory?
Yes, indeed. Now, Felix Sater is a name many of us investigating Trump Russia are very familiar with, and he comes up in a very big way in today's show. Stick around, we'll tell you why. But first, we have to ask, because we do so every week, that if you're interested in supporting our work, please do so, and you can do it by going to primosocial.com/narrative live.
Yeah, guys, I know it's been a little confusing with the @Narrative Live Twitter site. A lot of people are just hitting the follow button and not understanding the process of going through and actually paying for a $10 a month subscription. So go to primosocial.com/narrative live. You go in, they ask you your credit card information. It's completely safe. We've been working with these guys. You don't have anything to worry about. Then once they get your $10 a month subscription set up, or you can do a donation as well, a one-time donation. They will, once your subscription is set up, they will allow the follow to our @Narrative Live account. So you don't even have to hit the follow button. It would do it automatically for you.
Well, that's great. And thank you, everyone who's been donating and joining our supportive team. We really are thankful you're there. And let's stop this from happening. And this is the joy of live television.
But the music is so awesome,
you never know what's going to happen.
Jam out to it. So let's talk a little bit about Felix Sater, shall we?
Let's do it. Let's talk about Felix.
Okay, so for us crazy nerds who have been, getting down in the trenches and investigating Trump Russia all this time, we know who Felix is. But by the end of next week, I think he's going to be a household name.
Without a doubt.
Yes. He's a man of many contradictions. On the one hand, he's a convicted fraudster tied to a stock fixing scheme, Zev, I think, that was orchestrated by the Russian mafia, right?
Correct. All correct so far.
On the other hand, he's a verified FBI informant. So, okay. Anyway, he's a man of mystery, but he's also a contradiction in another way. For a man who seems to have a lot to hide, he doesn't shy away from the media.
I mean, Tracy, that's a really good description of the guy because, in many ways, he's no different than any other Russian immigrant you might encounter on Brighton Beach in Brooklyn, where there are lots of Russian immigrants. He's charming, he's affable, and he's very forthcoming, or at least appears to be forthcoming. But it's true to say that Sater operates in the grays of the world, and by that I mean the grays of the law, as you mentioned, the stock fixing scheme, the grays of business. He's got some sketchy, interesting business ties, and also the grays of the truth. So you can't always take what he says at face value, and that's important for everybody who's going to be watching what he says next week at those congressional hearings when he'll be testifying in front of the House Intelligence Committee. They've been investigating Trump Russia. I got to say, if there's a hearing I wouldn't want to appear in front of, it's Adam Schiff's hearing.
Exactly right.
He knows his stuff, and that appears to be the one Felix will be at. And he'll be facing the scrutiny of the members of the committee, but also America at large. In the same way that people got to see what Michael Cohen was about last week, they'll be getting a real sense of what Felix Sater is about next week. So he's a man who does wear his pressure well. You don't see him crack very often, but the weight of his
next
bravado,
week is going to be interesting,
and the weight of history is also going to be on his shoulders next week, and will be interesting to see how he evolves during that period of time.
By his own admission, Sater will tell you that he was the driving force behind Donald Trump's 2015 attempt to build Europe's tallest skyscraper in Moscow, the Trump Tower Moscow project. And we've been looking into this Trump Tower Moscow project for months now. And I think tonight we can finally share some of what we have learned.
And this is really, a very intense and extensive investigation we've done. And we can definitively say tonight that the attempt to build the Trump Tower in Moscow in 2015 and 2016 was directly tied to Trump's run for the presidency. There is just no other way to view the building or the attempt to build that tower in Moscow. It's directly tied to the election campaign.
Yes, the next two that I'm going to tell you guys about, this is something that's probably new to many, and it involves a lot of mysteries. So 3 weeks after signing a letter of intent with Trump, the Russian developer of the Trump Tower Moscow sold his only New York property under some really mysterious circumstances, and we'll talk about that. Lastly, Vladimir Putin's closest advisors were involved in the proposed development of the Trump Tower Moscow. And that will also include another mystery, a mysterious Kremlin insider.
I am the only person in either campaign that's self-funding. I'm putting up 100% of my own money. And right now, I will be putting up a tremendous, so far I put up less than anybody, and I have the best results. Wouldn't that be nice if the country could do that? But I will be putting up, you know, tremendous amounts of money. Super PACs are a disaster. They're a scam. They cause dishonesty. And you better get rid of them because they are causing a lot of bad decisions to be made by some very good people. And I'm not blaming these folks, but I guess I could. Very good people are making very bad decisions right now. And if anything comes out of this whole thing with some of these nasty and ridiculous questions, I will tell you, you better get rid of the super PACs because they're causing a big problem with this country. Not only in dishonesty and what's going on, but also in a lot of bad decisions that are being made for the benefit of lobbyists and special interests.
Becky. If only super PACs were the real problem.
The irony of that clip.
I mean, really, that was Donald Trump on October the 28th, 2015. It's the third Republican debate. Back then, he was still pretending to have morals, and it was really just pretending because while he was on stage negotiating and debating with all these competitors from the Republican Party, he was still, the third debate, he was still negotiating the Trump Tower deal. In fact, on that day, something very particular and special happened on October the 28th, 2015, related to the Trump Tower deal. Running for president on the one hand, and then doing a big deal with the Russians, potentially Putin, on the other hand. Just so I have it clear for everybody. That's what we're going to show you tonight.
Yeah, so after 3 failed attempts, it looked like Donald Trump's dream of building this gleaming 100-story Trump Tower in Moscow was finally going to take off. Inside the Trump Organization headquarters in Manhattan, the Moscow Project, as it was known, was being led by Trump's longtime fixer and lawyer, Michael Cohen, and executive vice president of the Trump Organization. The Trump children, particularly Ivanka and Don Jr., were also engaged in the development.
And that's something that really stood out for me when Michael Cohen was testifying last week, Tracy, because he made it very clear that the kids were involved and that it's a real sham to say that they were not involved, which puts at least Don Jr. in a very difficult position because he may have perjured himself when he testified about Trump Tower previously. Now, let's get back to Sater because he was the other key partner. Not his first rodeo with the Trumps. He, in fact, had worked with the Trumps for 15 years. You may recall during one Apprentice episode in 2006, 2007, he was showing off the Trump Soho. And that's the tower he built with questionable money from questionable sources with Ivanka and Don Jr. always by his side. And it's just one of the many buildings he's built for the Trumps. The other one, of course, is in Fort Lauderdale. But around the world, you'll find Felix Sater's creative business sense alongside many, many of Trump's towers.
Now, that is one way to describe him, but I want to show another way to describe him because last week when Cohen was testifying, California Representative Harley Ruda, he had some really clear views on what he thought about Mr. Sater. So let's take a look.
Mr. Cohen, in November 2013, President Donald Trump testified under oath in a lawsuit related to the failed real estate project, Trump International Hotel and Tower in Fort Lauderdale. During the deposition, President Trump was asked about his knowledge of Felix Sater, a Russian-born real estate developer and convicted member of the Russian mafia, who, according to press reports, pled guilty for his role in a $40 million stock manipulation scheme. And it's worth noting, as well publicized, the direct relationship between the Russian mafia and the Kremlin. Over the years, President Trump was asked how many times he interacted with convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater. In 2013, President Trump testified that, quote, "Not many. If he were sitting in the room right now, I really wouldn't know what he looked like," unquote. Mr. Cohen, as you previously testified, isn't it true that President Trump knew convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater in 2013 when he made that statement?
Yes.
Isn't it true that because of Mr. Sater's relationship to the Trump organization, that he had an office in the Trump Tower?
And on the 26th floor, Mr. Trump.
And the 26th floor is important. Why?
Because it's Mr. Trump's floor.
So he had an office on the same floor as President Trump.
In fact, his office, when he left, became my office.
And isn't it also true that convicted Russian mobster Sater even had business cards indicating that he was a senior advisor to Donald Trump, as reported by the Washington Post?
Yes.
Did convicted Russian mobster Sater pay rent for his office?
No, he did not.
So, based on those facts, isn't it true that President Trump misled at best, or worse, lied under oath?
Yes.
Seems to be bearing something in the back of both his former boss, Mr. Trump, and Mr. Sater in one answer.
Zev, what I was going through my mind as I watched that is, you know, how everybody does, you know, the so-called let's do some drinking games every time somebody says something. Can you imagine how drunk we would be every time Harley said convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater? Ridiculous.
In case that's how the congressman who now holds Mr. Rohrabacher's seat in Congress, which is
correct,
of course. So it's interesting that he chose to reflect so clearly on Sater's Russian mob past. And in fact, of course, Sater disputes this characterization. He does not go around saying, "Yes, I am a former Russian mobster." Yet he does, you know, he'll tell almost anyone that he's had a conviction and has got questionable ties to Russian oligarchs in the past. On the other hand, there's this other side to Felix Sater, because he claims to be a patriot. He claims and has been verified as an FBI informant, and he has been an intelligence asset to the American intelligence community over many, many decades. So he is, again, a man of many contradictions.
Yes, he is. And he unsuccessfully attempted to build that Trump Tower Moscow 3 times before. He thought the chance of success would go through the roof, Zev, in 2015. Because why? Trump was running for president.
Indeed, he did. As Cohen revealed in his testimony last week, Trump insiders viewed the whole election campaign as basically a giant infomercial. It was going to be good for the brand. It was going to be really good for them because they were going to make a lot of money. They thought as the brand improved, they could sell a lot more stuff, a lot more Trump steaks or whatever it is they do. Or did at the Trump organization. Do they do anything anymore? I don't know. But they back then it looked like a good idea. We'll let our guy run for president. We'll all get rich and he'll get famous and we'll all get wealthy on the back of the campaign. And indeed, Sater was amongst those people. No one really believed that Trump was going to win, and Sater agreed with that. He really believed that the buzz generated from the campaign would entice investors, would entice developers, and ultimately would entice Vladimir Putin to come on board and support the Trump Tower Moscow.
Yeah, I, for one, didn't believe it until election night as I was sitting there with my eyes bugging out of my head. But anyway.
Indeed.
So here's one of the quotes from Sater's emails. "We can own this election. I think I can get Putin to say that at the Trump Moscow press conference. If he says it, we can own this election. Americans' most difficult adversary agreeing that Donald Trump is a good guy to negotiate. ISIS,
Indeed.
Oil, Middle East, etc., etc. We can own this election. Michael, my next steps are very sensitive with Putin's very, very close people. We can pull this off. Michael, let's go. 2 boys from Brooklyn getting a USA president elected. This is good. Really good."
You can't read that email and not believe that Putin was somehow involved. And if he wasn't involved, certainly the people around him were very involved. And it's, and it's true that Sater knows a lot of these people. So I think these emails are damning evidence, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens next week when Sater is confronted in front of that committee with some of those emails. Now, Sater knew he needed 4 things to make it all happen. These are the 4. He needed a bank to say they would finance the tower. He needed a Russian developer who would agree to build the tower. He needed a viable development site, and he needed Putin's blessing to do all of this.
Yeah, and Sater has sat down with Chris Cuomo in the past. So let's take a look at a clip from that.
All right, so now let's talk about why they would be interested in you. All right, if the information about this subpoena is accurate, and they want to know about this Trump Tower deal, part of the intrigue there is how it was explained by you in an email. Yes. That this could be something where will get Putin on board, and he'll help bring our boy, as you were describing, then candidate Trump, help him win. You know, our boy can become president of the United States. We can engineer it. I will get all of Putin's team to buy in on this. I'll manage this process. It is provocative of the idea that Russia was trying to help elect this man president.
Indeed. And that's exactly why we pay a lot of attention to what Felix Sater did right afterwards. Not so much what he says, because that can be a bit hard to track down. But what he did right afterwards is very revealing about the network of friends that Sater has. And they're very influential people around Vladimir Putin. And that's what he did right next, because he made a bunch of interesting moves and brought them along on his Trump Tower mission over here. And the first of those was this guy, Evgeny Shmykov. Now, normally, if you're building a tower, going to the former general or a former general of Russian military intelligence, well, I mean, it may not come to you as your first thing, right? I mean, Tracy, it's probably, maybe you want someone who could build something, not someone who can be a military intelligence guy, as Shmykov clearly is. So really interesting that he came on board as Sater's first move. And the reason there is because Shmykov was really close to Putin, and may still be really close to Putin, or maybe not. Who knows what happened since then. Next up, what did he do?
They both approached Russia's VTB bank, the same bank that bailed out Oleg Deripaska 2 years previously. Sater reached out to Cohen via email and explained to him that it was absolutely huge to get VTB's CEO Andrei Kostin on board.
Indeed, he said it was particularly important, and he not only talks about Kostin. You're gonna have to read this for me, Tracy, because my eyesight's not as good as it used to be.
He says, "Good morning, Michael. Kostin, who is Putin's top finance guy and CEO of second largest bank in Russia, is on board and has indicated he would finance Trump Moscow. This is major for us. Not only the financing aspect, but Kostin's position in Russia, extremely powerful and respected. Now, all we need is Putin on board, and we are golden. Meeting with Putin and top deputy is tentatively set for the 14th. See, buddy, I can not only get Ivanka to spin in Putin's Kremlin office chair on 30 minutes notice, I can also get a full meeting. I will call you later today to discuss getting the letter of intent signed. Regards, Felix Sater."
No bravado there at all, but it was a big deal that they got Kostin on board. The next thing he did, Felix reached out to his old friend, Andrei Rozov. And it's interesting, Rozov knew Sater for many years. In fact, they'd first met when they both worked, actually before they both worked, at a company called Mirax, a company run by the guy you see on the very right of your screen here, Sergei Polonsky. Polonsky is also a fraudster, or apparent fraudster, who's currently not serving any jail time. But Sater knew Rolov from well early, or before his time at Mirax with Rozov. In fact, all the way back to the early 2000s when they met each other through a mutual friend.
Yeah, that's something that we learned exclusively in our investigations, Ev. I don't think anybody understands how close and how long the friendship between Sater and Rozov, who would turn out to be the developer of Trump Tower Moscow, how far that relationship went back. Years before they worked together at Mirax.
And then there's another connection which just blows our mind away, because Mr. Polonsky and Mr. Rozov are also tied to Oleg Deripaska, because they did a lot of business together way back when. If you've been watching our show since we started, you'll know that Oleg Deripaska is a big figure of interest for us as we investigate Trump Russia, because He's involved in absolutely everything. And here is another potential tentacle where, Oleg Deripaska might be involved in the Trump-Russia investigation and in the scandal, in that he might have done business. Well, we know he did business with the former boss of both Sater and the developer Rozov.
Yeah, and hold that thought, Zev, because Oleg's going to come back a little bit later in this story for some more interesting details. But anyway, let's talk again about Rozov. He was a really interesting choice because he had never built high-end luxury buildings. Never before this.
He's done some building, but not that.
He was involved in a boating accident in 2011, and a 19-year-old girl was killed.
A 19-year-old boy, but yes, in fact, that's true.
Oh, it was a boy. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. But that's in fact what happened.
And somehow in 2015, the same year as the Trump Tower Moscow deal, he got off through a Kremlin-granted amnesty.
It's really interesting when you look inside the Kremlin justice system or the Russian justice system. I mean, clearly, if you are a Kremlin insider, if you know Putin, you can do anything. And nothing will happen to you, because in both cases, Mr. Polonsky, who we saw earlier on, and Mr. Rozov here, both went to court. Various sort of things happened, pretending to be justice, but no one ever spends any time in jail because they are who they are, or they know who they know. Now, despite all these apparent negatives, Sater was able to convince Michael Cohen that Rozov was the guy to build the Trump Tower Moscow, and that's how a letter of intent was ultimately signed. And some of you have seen this. Maybe if you haven't, then just pull it up for you and you can see what it looks like. This is the actual letter of intent. It was signed on the same day.
on that very same day from that third Republican debate, October 28th, 2015.
Isn't that incredible? So while he was out there telling everyone that super PACs need to go away because they're so corrupt and they're creating lots of misdeeds in American politics, at the same time, Donald Trump was signing a letter of intent to build the Trump Tower in Moscow. Let that sink in for a second. Now, there was something else that was going on at the time. And this, again, we can reveal part of the information here is exclusive to us, but we also have to thank Wendy Siegelman, who has done incredible work throughout her investigation of Trump-Russia, an important journalist to follow. If you don't follow her, do so right away. But she was able to reveal another stunning development, which we think is crucial in the build of Trump Tower Moscow.
Yeah, this find was absolutely incredible. Thank you, Wendy. We love your reporting. It's emerged that in addition to the Trump Tower Moscow project, Sater and his buddy Rozov, they had a little side deal going. And what that side deal was, it was the sale of a New York building for $43 million. 3 weeks, just 3 weeks after that letter of intent was signed with Trump and Sater's buddy Rozov. So Sater, go ahead. This is where it gets really good, Zev. You go on.
Well, I just think the whole thing's really, the sale is so mysterious. It was never open to the public. The building was never marketed. And, if you talk to any broker in New York City, they will tell you it takes about a month to sell a building if you have sort of a private deal going on, if you're not marketing it. Well, I mean, the time frame here is incredible. You've got a month between the letter of intent and the closing of this business deal to sell this New York tower for $43 million. And interestingly enough, Sater is not the broker here. Sater it appears to be the seller along with Rozov. So did Sater pocket some of the $43 million that was paid for this building? And if so, why? And if so, why then? Because the timing is so suspicious.
Zev, what's really important is that they made $8 million above what they paid for it a year earlier. So that $8 million I find really, really interesting.
It is really interesting. And keep an eye out for this particular sale. We think that there is more to it than meets the eye. And again, Wendy, thank you very much for your incredible reporting as you brought us this bit of news. Now, we've been reading a lot of email exchanges, and you have one thing that stood out for you, didn't it, Tracy?
Yes. This is between Cohen and Sater. And it was like, boom, when we saw it. It was November 3rd, 2015. And Felix stated the following.
So he's in the Bahamas, and he wants to tell Cohen that he's going to be spending a few days with Alexei Rozov, the developer of the Trump Moscow in the Bahamas. And then he talks about a personal friend a person and partner to Putin's closest friend, a partner and advisor who has been with Putin since his teenage years, his friend and his partner. Now, this honestly, read it for yourself. I'm not even misreading it because it's so confusing. But
Zev,
once you parse it,
yeah,
you get a sense of what he's talking about.
It's one huge run-on sentence, but after we sat and read it about 10 times, we figured out what was going on here. And
he talks about the partner being the owner of the largest shopping center in Moscow, and he says that he's flying in on a private island, a private jet to the island. So we've got Putin.
We can confirm that this meeting did in fact happen in the Bahamas. It happened. The question is, who in the world is it? So if we take a look at this largest shopping center in Moscow, that leads us to Avia Park, which is a 6-story shopping center in the airport district of Moscow, Russia. It is the second largest shopping mall in Europe. Now, okay, who are the major shareholders? Well, one of them is a man named Igor Rotenberg, who happens to be the son of Russian billionaire Arkady Rotenberg, who is also a childhood friend of Putin's. And I think, Zev, didn't he do something judo partnering or something with him?
I don't know. Did he?
I think he was his Putin's judo partner.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting relationship that we've unveiled here, because many people will know that Roldugan was named in the Panama Papers as being the conduit for Putin to smuggle out many billions of dollars from Russia through the Panama Papers, through Roldugan's holding company. But most of that money, many people believe, came through Putin's embezzlement and shady business deals. And some of those businesses, those holding companies, were set up by the Arkadys brothers, who you see there on the right. These are among the closest people to Putin, and we, until today, have not ever included them in any conversation related to the Trump Tower in Moscow. But in rereading Felix Sater's emails to Michael Cohen, it seems to us that that's who he's referring to, because Roldugan is the guy that he's talking to about Putin's best friend from childhood. And these guys are very, very close. We can't tell which of the Rotenberg brothers he's referring to, but they're very, very close to Roldugan, business-wise, because they were both mentioned in the Panama Papers, but also as family friends from a very young age.
Yeah,
really
there's
people to pay attention
three
to this
of
one.
them.
It's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah, there's 3 of them. There's the Arkady. Forgive me if I'm saying his name wrong. His brother Boris, and then what takes us back to the shopping center is that Arkady's son Igor was a major shareholder. So that might be the link that between the Rotenberg brothers and Roldugan.
It's a really an interesting link. It's something worth paying attention to, and we hope other investigators will take a look at this, because wouldn't it be something if one of them was on vacation with Felix Sater and Rozov just around the time that letter of intent was signed, to discuss how they're going to put things together. I mean, the email, when you go back to the wording of it, it talks about how they are going to work together to get this in front of Putin, so Putin will ultimately agree to whatever plan they have.
Yeah, we know that the meeting took place. Now, was it one of them? We're not 100% sure, but we know the meeting was to discuss the progress of Trump Tower Moscow.
And we know it happened, and we'll keep digging until we find out exactly who was there. Now, we've mentioned Deripaska earlier, and now we've mentioned Rotenberg. Can we up the ante? Not really, but we can go back to Deripaska, and we can share a little bit more of information about how Oleg Deripaska might be tied to the Trump Tower Moscow. We're intrigued by other exclusive reporting, this time from Scott Stedman, another terrific investigative reporter who's been paying a lot of attention to Trump Russia. He suggests that Deripaska may have acquired a part of Rozov's, that's the developer, the Russian developer's IC Expert company, through one of Deripaska's directors. Her name is Iona Theophilo. And we can confirm that Theophilo is a director in Deripaska's EN Plus company. What we can't confirm at this stage is whether whether Theophilo is in fact also a director or a part owner of Rozov's company, which is what Scott Stedman is suggesting in his reporting.
Yeah, this thread definitely needs more investigation because it could really suggest a direct link between Oleg Deripaska and the Trump Tower Moscow project. Of course, this fascinates us because we've been digging into Oleg for months now. And Scott, again, this is a fantastic find, and we hope that we can all do a little bit more digging and make some more confirmations on this exclusive story that you ran.
It really is interesting because you've got, Kostner of VTB, who's a big funder of Deripaska, who is already tied to Sater when we look at Trump Tower Moscow. We have Rozov, who's the Russian developer, who's been a longtime friend of Sater and who's going to build the tower. And then on top of that, now we may be able to lay over a really interesting idea here that Deripaska may in fact own Rozov's company, which would make him a direct partner of Donald Trump's in building the Trump Tower Moscow. Now,
yeah, it's totally fascinating because we've been saying for so long that Oleg is a key figure in Trump Russia, and we truly believe that. And so these links are they're mind-blowing.
Now, if you believe Donald Trump or his son, or until last week Michael Cohen, until he changed his tune, but definitely if you believe Felix Sater, once that letter of intent was signed back in 2015, that deal fizzled away. They all say that there was no other communication, no other negotiation, nothing happened after that letter of intent was signed in October of 2015. Now, I don't think that's exactly what happened, and I'm sure other people don't think exactly what happened. And then last week came the bombshell from Michael Cohen.
So let's take a look at the timeline here. Going back to October 28, 2015, that's when Rozov, the developer, who's friends with Felix Sater, signed the letter of intent that he would be the builder of the Trump Tower. Then the next month, November 2015, Sater and Rozov and that mysterious Kremlin insider, they take a vacation in the Bahamas to discuss the Trump Tower project. The next month, December 2015, Rozov's only New York office tower sells for $8 million over asking in a private sale with, who, Felix Sater. February 16th, 2016, that brings us to the Iowa caucuses.
Going further, I want to apologize to each member, to use Congress as a whole. The last time I appeared before Congress, I came to protect Mr. Trump. Today, I am here to tell the truth about Mr. Trump. I lied to Congress when Mr. Trump stopped negotiating the Moscow Tower project in Russia. I stated that we stopped negotiating in January of 2016. That was false. Our negotiations continued for months later during the campaign. Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. That's not how he operates. In conversations we had during the campaign, at the same time I was actively negotiating in Russia for him, he would look me in the eye and tell me there's no Russian business, and then go on to lie to the American people by saying the same thing. In his way, he was telling me to lie. There were at least a half a dozen times between the Iowa caucus in January of 2016 and the end of June when he would ask me, how's it going in Russia? Referring to the Moscow Tower project.
So that's really interesting because he talks about half a dozen times after the Iowa caucuses and before June, so between February and June of that year, where there was at least inquiry about how the Trump Tower Moscow project was going on. There has been other testimony, not so much testimony, but there's been other people like Giuliani saying that maybe it went on all the way through the end of 2016. Other people have endorsed that or supported that view, that maybe negotiations went all the way beyond the election. And that's how far all of that went. It's certainly really interesting, isn't it, Tracy?
It is, and I believe that Lanny Davis, who is Michael Cohen's lawyer, he talked a little bit about the same thing with Rachel Maddow.
And then the final iteration contained an absolutely knowingly false statement, not only by Michael, that he did no Russian Moscow Tower activity after the Iowa caucuses. And let me just tell you one example. So Donald Trump would have a rally after the Iowa caucuses. The campaign begins, as we all know. And he'd be at a rally telling everybody, no Russia, no discussions, no collusion, no Russia. And his rally crowd would cheer and believe him. Within a few minutes, he'd be walking out of that rally, and he would turn to Michael and say, so what's going on in Russia? What's going on in Moscow? It was that blatant, and that much is in the public record, and there'll be more developed next Wednesday at the Intelligence Committee.
And that's has developed, because that's what happened yesterday when Michael Cohen wheeled in an entire suitcase full of evidence.
There's been some confusion. I mean, we did know ahead of time that he was going to present his evidence. That you know, he was. Some lawyers for Trump might have suggested or made some changes to his testimony, but I think the suitcase may, in fact, have been closed. But it was.
I'm sure there's something in there that would have been interesting testimony. But you know, he did come with receipts, and those receipts were basically to say that Abby Lowell, Mr. Sekulov, maybe Mr. Giuliani, maybe Jared Kushner, maybe others, had told him to, in fact, change his statement before Congress, which would have been a crime called suborning perjury, which until recently I had no idea what it was. But it is a crime. It's akin to obstruction of justice, and a very serious one indeed. So
yeah. So where have we come with this story? Because I feel like we're at the end where we need to leave people with some things to ponder. Don't you think so, Zeb?
I like pondering, and I like leaving people with things to ponder. So let's ponder away.
So if the deal to build Trump Tower Moscow ended with the signed letter of intent, which was October 28th, 2015, and that's what, you know, Trump's, you know, Sater, everybody's saying it didn't go any further than this letter of intent, right?
That's what they're saying.
What in the world was happening between the end of October 2015 and the election in November 2016? That is the critical time frame where everyone is lying about what happened. And I'm going to ask, why?
I see what you're getting at, Tracy. So basically you're saying, you know, there is a period of time after which they said that there was nothing going on in 2016, where stuff was going on. And now everything else that they've said around that period of time, about that period of time, we can't take at face value, because we kind of know now that they were lying about all that stuff. Like, take, for example, this little section of the letter of intent, where at the bottom, the top of this Schedule 2, I believe it is, it talks about license fees. And Tracy, you spotted this, and we're really interested in what should have been a $2 million payment.
Right. The letter of intent is very specific about the next steps in the development. Okay, under those license fees, it says that $1 million would be due once a license agreement was executed, and another $1 million once a location was approved. So, Zeb, I just keep coming back to, could you tell me, could you really say that a year went by from October to the election where they were working on this project and they're lying about what happened, and no location was finalized, no license agreement was drawn up?
Well, in fact, we can say that maybe no license agreement was drawn up because we haven't seen anything resembling that. But we do know that they found a location in Moscow City. There were plans drawn up. We've seen them. There was architects, or were architects, involved in designing them and building them. Many of them are being questioned right now. So there was a lot going on. Plus, you know, Putin and his team and his oligarchs and everybody else was piling on, including the military intelligence guy, Shmykov and Deripaska, and God knows who else was involved. Now, there must have been a lot going on in this.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to point out, if anybody in Congress or if anybody on Mueller's team wants to do any investigating, maybe look into that New York sale of Sater and Rozov, where they made $8 million, you know, 3 weeks after the letter of intent was signed. I don't know. I'm just saying that maybe they might want to do a little research into that when it comes to following the money.
It could be really interesting because, in fact, the wording that everyone likes to use is no money traded hands. Well, just because no money traded hands doesn't mean other things could not have traded hands, possibly a New York tower. Now, just to be clear, we do not know that this building sale in New York City had anything to do with Trump Tower Moscow, although it does involve two key players of Trump Tower Moscow. One is Felix Sater, the other one is Alexei Rozov. So it's worth keeping an eye on. And then we don't know that it's connected to the letter of intent and this license fee exhibit at the end of it. But it is interesting that some of these things happened and that there was money supposed to trade hands for those things. So
we don't. And you know what? We're just going to keep investigating. Something happened during that year's time. Something happened that prompted everybody to lie to Congress and to perjure themselves. So what is that? We don't know, but we certainly need to find out.
Sater, of course, will face heated questions next week when he'll be asked about the exact timing of and the nature of his conversations with Donald Trump, his kids, and Michael Cohen throughout the development of Trump Tower Moscow. And my guess is he's going to stick very much to the testimony that he gave Congress last year. And that testimony was that there was nothing that happened after the letter of intent. To this day, Sater claims he is personally linked the success of Trump Tower Moscow to Trump's election run. But he doesn't believe that Putin or Russia pursued the project to gain leverage over Trump. It's really hard to believe with emails like this going around, but nevertheless, that I think is what he's going to say next week in front of
Donald owns.
There we are. We missed the beginning of that. I'm sorry, Tracy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say that this email describes it is a game changer. We will manage this process better than anyone. You and I will get Donald and Vladimir on a stage together very shortly. That's the game changer.
I mean, it certainly does seem to me when you read these kinds of emails, and there was a lot of them, you know, it goes beyond getting a tour of Putin's office for Ivanka and a little attempt to sit in his chair for a while. They were talking about policy. They were talking about ISIS. They were talking about oil. They were talking about a joint press conference, about making deals across the world. And this was not just a deal about a tower. It was a deal about a tower and an election. And that's why, you know, the question we first posed at the top of the show today was there a connection between the tower and the election and campaign of Donald Trump? And it's hard for anybody to argue that there wasn't, because there clearly was. There was clearly a tie in every email correspondence that Sater has with everybody else, plus the fact that he was campaigning at the time, that he was signing letters of intent and other parts of this agreement, certainly leads anyone with a rational point of view to the point where you'd say that the election and the Trump Tower Moscow were definitely connected.
They were. And here's the question. Do you think that Sater, if he could go back and do it over again, he would do it the same way, Zev?
Well, you'd have to ask him. But my guess is that, knowing what he knows now, would be that he would not do it in the same way. And I think that, along with the fact that they've been all lying and covering up so much, is an indication that something went really awry in this. And we're going to find out what that is. And I think the committees of intelligence and otherwise who are investigating this in Congress, as well as Mueller, have got their work cut out for them, but they're going to get to the bottom of this without a doubt.
And I have a feeling it's going to be sooner rather than later.
Indeed. That was a fun show, wasn't it, Tracy?
It was.
Also, who
doesn't love a Thursday evening with you, Zev?
Oh, thank you so much. The whole day and an evening with you is just pleasurable. as the clock turns 11.
I don't think everybody understands how hard and how long it takes us to prepare for a show. In fact, Mini Me came to me about 2 hours ago and said, "Mama, I just don't understand. You've been working all day long. How long could it take?" And I said, "Girlfriend, you have no idea."
Like, this is what our mind looks like right now. And that's just our research materials, just so we can understand what was going on. We'll publish some of that later on. Plus, we'll have a story about this coming up on narrative.org. Plus, as always, if you like our work and you want to support it, please go to primasocial.com/narrative live. It's $10 a month. You get access to our very, very cool, and really on top of it, breaking news feed for Trump Russia. And you get to support our work in terms of live shows that we do on a regular basis, and our blog at narrative.org. guess that's it for
tomorrow
us.
may be a big day. We don't know, but you know,
is something happening?
might
tomorrow?
want to get a good night's sleep tonight.
I don't know. I didn't read anything about anything happening. I better go to bed then. Good night.